Hey everybody, you're listening to Dillon and Michael podcast. Name
to be determined.
Name to be determined. Yes. We're two originally American, moved to Israel, joined the IDF.
Why did we join the IDF?
That's a good question. I think for me, I just want an adventure. Like, I am the not the ideologue that I know you to be. You joined to fight for the Jewish people.
For the ideology and obviously the incredible army salary that you get.
Yeah, the 1,000 shekels a month kind of thing.
Yeah,
you can really...
really gets you going.
Before we get into that, we wanted to start this podcast to really bring some new ideas, I think, in new discussion to what's been to this area of the world, especially at a time where there's just a lot of insanity, it seems like everyone's got an opinion now, including us. Michael, you come more from like a current events kind of guy. You love reading the news. Whenever I need my news, I just get my 15-minute segment from you and I'm pretty good to go.
What can I say? I love the newspaper.
I think you actually read a newspaper too. It's not just like the internet; it's an actual newspaper.
Yeah, for whatever reason, I can separate myself from the good old physical newspaper.
Very old school. Very old school. I'm one day I feel like I'm coming in here and be smoking a pipe while you read. That'd be wonderful. I'm even more boring. I'm more of like history background, amateur historian. And yeah, we just wanted to, I think, get together and see kind of some new ideas that we can maybe interject in here, because I know we both got some crazy ones. And we both kind of sit, I would say, on slightly opposite sides of the political spectrum as well. I grew up in California. I'm a California lefty. Moved to Tel Aviv as well, another lefty city, so I fit right in.
Yeah, and I come from Long Island, went to college at New York University, got my bachelor's degree in politics, my master's in international relations. And along the way, I very much became Zionist is the accurate term. Yeah, I very much became pro-Israel and Zionist and connected to my Jewish heritage and to my Jewish identity. It didn't particularly come from a household that was very connected to Israel. Came from a house that was very, very, very secular, which obviously you could be connected to Israel and still be secular, but when you live outside of Israel and you don't have as much of a connection to the religion, I think it's a little bit harder to maintain clear identity connection with, or an easy identity connection with Israel, or with Judaism as a whole. And my parents, very secular. For me, when I was growing up, going to temple was, a pain in the ass, where I had to put on a suit and a nice clothes and a big suit jacket that never fit me, and I had to sit and wait in the synagogue and wait for some rabbi to finish some long spiel, and that was my experience with Judaism growing up. I didn't really have a.
Did you guys go to like a Orthodox shul, or was it more like a reform synagogue?
So we went to a reform synagogue, which, when I look retrospectively back on that experience, I noticed a lot. I can notice today a lot of things that I find fascinating. Well, at the time, I didn't think it was fascinating at all.
You were ready to be over. Like, where's the playroom? Where the kids?
Exactly.
I get you. Yeah.
Exactly. Now, for example, I went to a very reformed synagogue that looked very much like a church. We called it temple. We didn't call it synagogue. There was an organ playing in the reformed synagogue. It was very much, there was the whole, what do you call it? The paintings on the sides of churches.
Murals.
There's murals on the side. It was very much a feeling of a church, except it was definitely not a church.
So instead of a cross, you had a Star of David, basically.
Exactly. Instead of a cross, we had a Star of David. All the prayers were both in English and in Hebrew. We would do like the classic prayers also in English. And, I look back at that retrospectively as like a fascinating cultural phenomena of American Judaism kind of
It's the dominant culture crashing into the immigrant culture and both of them absorbing each other.
Exactly. And at the time, what I said to myself was, "Get me the fuck out of here. I don't want to do this." But obviously over time things changed. 17 was my first time coming to Israel, and out of nowhere, I came here on a program where I studied in Israel for 2 months. Found it on Google. This was how I found things in my childhood. I didn't.
Shout out to Google.
Google was the place, even both then and now, that
get all the answers.
That one finds things.
I don't know. ChatGPT's taken and TikTok. By
Correct. But back in my day, it was how can I escape Long Island was what I typed into Google, and the second or third choice was come study in Israel for 2 months. And I found myself entering something into a deep ideological rabbit hole where I very much.
Is this kind of where the Zionism started for you, or did it start prior to that?
I remember reading a little bit about Israel and getting fascinated by its history and all the wars and the conflict and this young Jewish nation defending itself, and what does that even mean? And all the Jews that I knew, were from Merrick and Belmore and Long Island. I didn't know this whole other world out there. And for me, it was just this fascinating cultural, I don't even know how to describe it, this phenomena, very much that I had never been exposed to. And coming to Israel for the first time at 17 was very much an adventure for me.
Yeah.
And like a lot of these programs do, I was... I left the program very much attached to Israel. I'm sure Israel detractors will look at this as, me. This was my time when I was radicalized by Israeli society.
Well,
and
what
Israeli
attracted
propaganda.
you to Israel?
Well, beyond getting out of Long Island, I think it was just something that was cool and interesting, and it was an adventure, and it was the history, and it was the initial, the initial push that got me out of Long Island and to see Israel. But I think once I was here, what really got me into the whole Israel thing was very much the successful way in which our instructors in this course that we did connected us with our Jewish heritage, with our membership in the Jewish people, which was something that I never really thought about until that point. I never really understood that I'm a part of a people, and I thought that was very cool. I have this whole people now. I'm not just some kid from Long Island. I'm part of this group. And I think that was a really, really meaningful thing for me. And I came back to America 17 years old, very much with this notion in my head that I'm going to move to Israel, going to serve in the army, and
oh wow, you already decided.
Oh yeah, I had no idea what any of this meant, but I was like, yeah, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna go to Israel. I'm gonna serve in the army, and I'm gonna live my life in Israel and have beautiful life, beautiful children, and a beautiful Israeli home, and that's just gonna be that.
Can I propose a theory? Because I spent a lot of time thinking about exactly what you just said. Like, why do so many Americans come to Israel? I mean, for me, mostly I know it's with Americans, and they're just completely enamored by the place. In a place that economically is a disaster compared to the United States, in a place where, we come here, we don't know the language, we don't know the culture, brand new bureaucratic system, people's relationship even with the government is completely different than what most Americans have experienced. And yet you have this for a not insignificant percentage of people who want to come here. And I think it has to do with exactly what you just said, which is Israel kind of gives you identity. It gives you, just by being here. I feel like Jews in the United States worked extremely hard to just assimilate. And you even mentioned it yourself with the Reform Synagogue. That's not, that was not an accident. That was an intentional choice by Jews in order to become more accepted by mainstream American society, was to get rid of the kippah, get rid of the payas, get rid of all, these sort of things that make us Jewish, kind of sever that connection with the old world in order to become someone new in the United States. And for a lot of immigrants, that was the American dream, the American promise. You can be somebody new because you're no longer tied to your class and your religion and your whatever. That was the initial dream. You can come here, you can make something of yourself. and Jews took that very seriously. But in the process, we kind of severed our roots. The American Jews kind of severed their roots to who they are, and so much of identity comes from your history and who you are, and I think when you come here and you realize that there is a history to you and your family and your people, it gives you the sense of, this is who I am. This is what separates me from the rest of the world. And Israel is very much it's almost like this Jewish project. The way I describe it is it adds you as a drop in this massive river that is 5,000 years of Jewish history. And by just being here, you're participating in that history. And I think for a lot of people, that's myself included, I thought that was very cool.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that what the point that you touch on there really reflects, in my opinion, this basic human desire in all of human history to connect with the society around them in a very concrete way. No matter where humans were, in almost any historical example that I can think of, humans tend to be very, very social animals, tend to be, or always do whatever they possibly can in order to connect with the society around them. And I think that the easy connection that American Jews are able to feel when they come to Israel comes alongside this sense of, I don't want to say decadence, but the sense of a feeling that the United States, in my opinion, hasn't been able to provide that same sort of national identity, not just to American Jews, but in general to its whole population. I think that in recent years, America has kind of gone down this path of no longer are we a nation of X or Y or Z, a clear and concrete explanation of who we are and how we got here. America is a place where a bunch of individuals live, and each individual can live out his or her own life, and if they work hard enough and try hard enough, there's no reason why they can't succeed. And for a lot of people, that works out very well, but I think that the downside to that is the dissonance that it causes for a lot of individuals in the United States that truly are hungry out of their natural human instinct for that greater society. And I think that touches everyone, not just the American Jewish population.
I think people want meaning in their lives. And,
Exactly.
the best example I use is, we saw on October 7th, for instance, the entire country was mobilized. Like, not just like you and me who reported to the IDF, but everybody was going to food banks and everybody was rushing to give blood and everybody was really coming together as part of this national project. And I contrast that with 9/11. I mean, we were kids when that happened, but you had this sort of hunger in American society for something like that. People wanted to contribute to the overall national security, the overall national project of the United States. And what did George W. Bush tell people at the time? There's a great clip of him saying this where he's like, go out and go shopping. You want to help America? Go stimulate the economy? Go shopping. And it's like, that is the culmination of your life as an American.
Exactly. And I think that, that mix, at least for me in my life, really did have a significant effect where I kind of came back to America as a 17-year-old saying, wow, I don't feel the sort of national connection to
it's isolating.
This place. Exactly. That I felt when I was over there. And, obviously I look back and I realize how much of, what I was saying was reflective of a hyper ideological teenage desire for whatever.
Well, that's the age too, usually in a young person's life that you search for, like, who am I? You ask that question.
Exactly. But, at the end of the day, the desire, no matter how, maybe as a teenager, I couldn't process the thoughts as maturely as I can today, but the impetus behind everything was not teenage. The impetus behind everything was very, very human. It's that same instinct that I talked about before. And that carried with me until I was 23 years old when I finished my master's, graduated from NYU. When I was at NYU, I was very active in the pro-Israel scene. I led Torch Pack, which was our local APAC chapter at university. and was very active in lobbying members of Congress to support Israel and to carry out all sorts of activities to help Israel. I was very much focused on that in my day-to-day life. And when I was 23 years old, I took the leap of moving to Israel as a part of Garin Sabah, as a part of a program that basically integrates young international Jews into Israeli society and into the army by first living on a kibbutz for 3 months, and then afterwards joining the army and serving for a minimum of 2 years typically. If you come younger, then you have to do a little bit more.
It's way better than how I did. I just did it all by myself.
Yeah?
Oh yeah, it was super hard actually.
That was-
I looked at you guys at Green Savar. You guys had like a group of friends, you had people taking care of you. They like handle the bureaucracy, and meanwhile here I am, fresh off the boat immigrant, don't know anybody, and I'm doing it all by myself.
Well, how exactly did you find yourself in Israel? How did you get here?
Dude, if you had told me at 18, 19 years old, hey, just so you know, when you get older, you're gonna make Aliyah, you're gonna immigrate to Israel and join the IDF, I would have punched you in the face. I would have called you a traitor, and I would have hit you in the face. And I remember I had that feeling the first time I came to Israel on a birthright trip, free trip, and I met an American, someone like us basically, who had immigrated from America and joined the IDF. And in my head I thought, you fucking traitor. Like, how dare you join another nation's army? Even though Americans have been doing that for centuries. But I grew up opposite side of the country, California, in Long Beach specifically, and like you, my probably even more secular than yourself. My father's Catholic, my mom's Jewish. They decided that they weren't going to have religion in the household, and that was their way of sort of not having to even ask that question of how do we raise the kids. Although after a while, my mom kind of would take us to synagogue every now and then. My dad at that point was a fully fledged atheist, so he was just like, whatever, this is clearly some cultural thing for you. I don't really give a shit.
Right.
But I was always very interested in the military. I just thought that there was something about, again, like I always like history, and one of the things about history is that it's always very violent. You look at the most times you look through history, it's so much of the human story has been shaped by war and just people's violently colliding into each other. Humans are I think, for anyone who likes history or who studies it will probably agree that humans are pretty violent, and historically we've kind of seen that. And so for me, unlike kind of you who seemed like you really were connecting to that Jewish side, I didn't really have any of that connection or that connection to Israel, but I thought that the military was just something that like men throughout history have done, and I wanted to experience that as well. I think maybe that I was just connecting to myself as like just a man, basically.
Interesting.
And
interesting.
I almost joined the U.S. Marine Corps right out of high school. I was talked out of it. I had go to college.
Who talked you out of it?
Everybody. Everybody talked me out of it. There was not a single person in my life who was like, that's a good idea. So I ended up going to college just in my hometown, Cal State Long Beach. It was my first time out of home, and I loved being outside the house, but I hated college because I was just floating through it. I studied international studies because for some reason I thought I would never get a job if I studied history, but international studies, I'll for sure get a job. Not sure what I was thinking there. Joined a fraternity, just spent my days just drinking and partying and depressed, and didn't understand why. And it actually wasn't until I had my first trip on mushrooms that I was like, all right, I need to get my shit together. I started working out, losing weight, started studying more in school, and I decided that, I was going to study Arabic because I felt like I need to graduate with something. I'm here already, so screw it. And my counselor at the time, he told me about this great program in Israel. 6 months, you come out here, you study 500 hours of spoken Arabic. I was like, great. So I came out here, was at Givat Haviva, which is a little further north. It's right where Hadera is, so it's about hour and a half drive north of Tel Aviv, on a kibbutz with a bunch of other foreigners, studying Arabic, studying some Hebrew, studying Middle Eastern history and Jewish history as well. And that Jewish history class was actually, to me, one of the most meaningful classes I think I ever took in my college career, because it really, the professor's thesis for that class was not how could the Holocaust have happened, which is what a lot of people ask, but how did it not happen sooner? And he was basically following the history of Jews initially from the Middle East into Europe, into America.
Wow. Fascinating.
And basically discussing how European culture was, anti-Semitic from the times of the ancient Greeks. When Alexander led the Greek army into Judea at the time, they were disgusted with Jews. They thought they were lazy because they didn't work on Shabbat. The Greeks had great respect for the human body, and we've all seen the Greek statues. They had great respect and love and appreciation of the human body. Jews, meanwhile, were circumcising boys, chopping off parts of their penises, and they thought that was disgusting, which I agree with them on that, but that's a whole nother discussion.
That'll be
episode 2.
Episode 2, yeah.
We'll come back with a title. And that feeling of anti-Semitism carried on till today, and he kind of walked us through that. But basically, by the end of it, when we wrote we had like a thank you gift for him, and I wrote on the gift like, "You made me proud to be a Jew," which is the first time I ever felt that in my life until that point.
Interesting.
Because I went to a public high school, public school my entire life. For me, being Jewish was just like, my mom told me I'm Jewish, and I was mostly teased for it than anything. I had lots of friends; it didn't bother me that much, but it was more of like a shame kind of thing, I think, because I was teased for it and I had no other connection to Judaism besides that. This was the first time where I really felt like, okay, I'm actually proud to be Jewish. And it was a fascinating experience for me in the sense that I actually, ironically, coming back from Israel, it made me more anti-Israel because I spent most of the time here studying Arabic and being in Arab villages and learning about the history of Israel through the perspective of the Palestinians.
Interesting.
And in Israel, by the way. And so when I got back, it was the summer of 2014, month after I get home, the Tzuk happens, Operation Guardians on the Wall, or Protective Edge, Operation Protective Edge. And I was extremely anti-Israel. My mom was like, "What happened to you over there? You're brainwashed." But at the same time, I sort of felt to myself, I actually joined the IDF deciding that, because if I want to criticize Israel, I need some credentials under my belt. And I figured if I join the IDF, then when I criticize Israel, no one could say that I'm anti-Israel.
Wow.
No one could be like, "You hate Israel." Because I was an Israeli citizen and I joined the IDF, and I could criticize them from a position of authority. And also I still had that passion for the military, still wanted to have that experience. All my friends who had been to Iraq and Afghanistan at that point told me it was just boring. It was basically like, they were saying it was standing, it was almost, it wasn't really a military job at that point, it was a policing job. And they all said it was boring and awful and don't do it. And when I told them, and I was very nervous telling them actually, I was like, I'm thinking about joining the IDF. They all told me, go for it. They're like, the IDF is so badass, do it. I'm seeing that, 2014, there's opportunities to actually see combat and to experience that. And I was like, I have to do this. And I did.
Wow.
And when I told my mom, I was very also nervous telling her. But because of all the criticism I thrown at Israel, she was like, thank God you're joining the IDF, because I swear to God, I thought you were going to join Hamas.
So how do you look back now, retrospectively, on the rationalization that you had at the time, as you were 23 years old, 22? How old were you?
I was your age. I was 23 when I made it.
Also.
Yeah.
So you're 23 years old. You're having these thoughts of, I want to strengthen my ability to talk about certain subject matters. I want to experience things that people have told me I should experience, be it as someone who's interested in the military in general, or as you mentioned earlier, as a man. How do you look back on this rationalization almost a decade later?
That's a great question. I think it was similar to. I honestly think of it similar to kind of what I just described earlier, and what we kind of talked about with you as well, which is I had this need to find out who I was, to be told who I was, to be honest. Not even to find out. I feel like was more of a mission of self-discovery. I needed an organization to tell me this is who you are. And it wouldn't have mattered to me if I was a U.S. Marine, if I was a French Foreign Legionnaire, or if I was an IDF soldier. Like I needed, they say, like Joe Rogan made a great joke about vegans, like hardcore vegans, where he's like, because they're just looking for a group, right? He's like the only reason they're vegan is because Al Qaeda didn't find them first. Like, honestly, I was just one of those people who just needed a group to give me that identity, to tell me who I was, and I feel like I am exactly who Israel looks for. I am the person who you want a group, great. Join this national project.
Join this national project that is the state of Israel.
Exactly. Be that drop in the water of 5,000 years of Jewish history. That I think that for me is exactly what I was looking for and what I needed at the time, and Israel was there to give me all of that. Not only was it giving me an identity, like not only was it becoming like a soldier, but it's giving me an identity and a history and all these things that I had never felt in the United States. And for me, it's caused me definitely a lot of like self-reflection, especially now that I'm a bit older, now that I've been through an actual war. It's really caused a lot of like self-reflection. And to be honest, look, I'm happy with my life here. I have an amazing wife, beautiful son. I'm glad I made it, but there is that part that also goes, did you need to do that?
Did you need to do that?
Did you really need to go through all that? But I think I did. I was just immature at the time, and I did need that.
I would guess no matter what path you had ultimately chosen as a 23-year-old Dillon, you would have gone down that path, and at the end of it, you would have also asked yourself that same question.
100%.
Did I need to do this in order to... So why don't you continue your story for a little bit? You're 23, you joined the army, you went completely by yourself.
Yeah. So I did that. I lived actually in Ramle, which is about 30 minutes east of Tel Aviv. It's another ancient city. It sits right between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. It was a very important trade city, a very important military outpost as well, for a lot of medieval and ancient peoples that lived here. Again, just throwing in the history because that's what I do. But to be, it's honest. So Israel sometimes likes to build itself as a place where Jews and Arabs live side by side. Even in Jerusalem, I've never seen that. There are very clear demarcations of neighborhoods. This is a Jewish neighborhood. This is an Arab neighborhood. Ramla is maybe the only place I've ever visited where Jews and Arabs are actually neighbors. And they actually live next to each other, and they actually hang out. And for me, like living in Ramla was kind of cool because I still spoke a decent amount of Arabic, spoke no Hebrew. So I would do all my shopping at the Arab stores. I'd go in, and because that was the only language I could speak besides English. And it was a very cool 6-month experience. Fast forward, it did take a little bit for me to join the IDF because I was doing it all by myself and dealing with some bureaucracy. But along the way, I found this sort of pre-army program called Israel-Hamas War, which is Hebrew for Team of Warriors. And they got me very interested in trying out for like the special units in Israel. And so I also like kicked my ass and got me in shape. And so after I did the Hebrew course in the army, which is a 3-month, it's a bit of a joke, but it's you do learn some stuff like some Hebrew and just more like army routine. I went to Combat Engineering Corps, and from there they had a tryout for a unit called Yalom, which is kind of each like unit, each corps has their own special unit. Yalom was a special unit of the Combat Engineers, and they deal mostly with tunnels. That's kind of their real claim to fame, honestly, is tunnels. But they also do things like, anything that requires like sabotage with explosives, things like that. I got in. It was extremely unforgiving training of about 16 months in total. And
wow, 16 months.
It's 16 months. And it's funny too, at the time, this is when I met you and you're green and everything, and we kind of were slowly getting to know each other. And I was mostly close with with a guy named Gabe, who I met the Hebrew course, and you guys were, you were in the tank corps, and you guys were already finishing up for 8 months. You guys were fully fledged tankers,
Right.
going home on the weekends. You got your cell phones with you. I was so jealous. I was like, why did I do this to myself? This is such bullshit. I was going home, seeing my girlfriend like once a month, maybe twice a month kind of thing. Never had access to my phone except for like an hour before bed. Maybe if we were in the field. But by the time we got out, like it was worth it in the sense that there's a great sense of pride obviously that comes with being a part of a unit like that. The downside was that for the most part, it was an incredibly boring service. And, I say that because it was a peaceful time. Like we were in the Army from 2016 to 2019, I believe.
Right.
It was a very peaceful time in Israel for Israelis.
Exactly.
It was a very peaceful time.
We served in the Army 2 years after the end of Operation Protective Edge.
Mm-hmm.
And basically saw Israel go through what it often goes through in these period of times between rounds of fighting with Hamas, where it has its X amount of years of quiet, a little bit of rockets here and there, but mostly calm. I think towards the end of our service, I remembered that things started to heat up a little bit, but it never got to the point that we later saw with, of course, the recent war and the several rounds of fighting that were.
There was one time in our service where there was exchange of rocket fire with Hamas, and they had us all loaded up onto buses, fully geared, post war preparation, basically telling us you guys we're invading Gaza. And then the bus leaves the base and we're all, quiet, stressed, on the verge of throwing up or crying, whatever. And then the bus turns around, they're like, never mind, no war. It's just like so, but no, there was one, I think, meaningful thing that we did do. This was in December 2018. Where, so once you finish your main service, you come back as a reservist. You come back, for us, we came back twice a year for about a week each time. Each time we come back, we have a meeting with an intelligence officer. Kind of gives us, here's the state of play, what's going on right now from the IDF's perspective. And every time they told us, Hamas don't worry about them, they just want to be a government. We know today that they were completely wrong. But Hezbollah was always the biggest threat. And the Army had known for a while that Hezbollah wanted to do an October 7th style attack. Right. They wanted to come in, they wanted to capture northern villages, kidnap Israelis, and essentially force us into a situation where we would have to make major concessions on behalf of the Palestinians and the Iranians, likely. And so all our trainings we did in the reserve were in preparation for something like that. In 2018, Hezbollah they dug several tunnels that actually reached underneath the Israeli border. And unlike in what happened recently, the IDF was very much on top of this in terms of they had a lot of intelligence assets that were telling them basically once the tunnels crossed into Israel, they deployed the Yalom units to the border along with the infantry and tanks, because there was the concern that Hezbollah would freak and try and invade or do something crazy at least. In order for us, and we were operating completely on our side of the border, but we filled up the tunnels with concrete or we just blew them up. And it, in my opinion, prevented a major, major attack on the north. There were a couple of moments, because where we happened to be, the tunnel actually hadn't reached Israel's border yet. And I think Hezbollah was very concerned that we were going to cross into Lebanon because they came out in force. And there were a couple moments that we had, I remember, where we basically just got in these Mexican standoffs. We were kind of in these no man's lands, north of the Israeli fence, but not technically in Lebanon, but the Lebanese consider it their territory. And where we would just be laying on the ground on our stomachs 20, 30 yards away from Hezbollah soldiers doing exactly the same thing. And it was sort of what do we do? But long story short, that was probably the most meaningful part of my 3-year service. But how about you? Let's hear about your Army time.
So my army time, I would say, the way you described it as, during Israel's one of the longest recent periods of peace in Israel, very much also reflected on my service. Much of my regular service was in the Armored Corps. I was a loader in a tank and afterwards a tank commander. Largely did not have a super exciting service with a lot of action or anything like that. It was a very calm service where, have friends that I still speak with today, and I got to learn an enormous amount of what is currently useless information about tanks, at least until the war started. And yeah, I kind of just got it deep into this world of.
I feel like, by the way, just real quick, I feel like everything the army taught us seemed useless until the war started.
Until the war, yeah.
And suddenly, it's like, oh my god, this is actually quite relevant. What we learned.
Exactly. I remember leaving the army and being like, wow, my brain has so much space taken up for things that I will never, ever, ever, ever use again.
Yeah.
What, except for, the only two things I could use as part of my brain for is going to war or making a podcast. That's it. I don't have any.
And now we're doing both.
And now we're doing both. So these are the only things that I could possibly do with them. I finished up my regular service, and I remember this feeling that was kind of similar to what I felt as that 17-year-old kid coming back to America from Israel, where, at the time I was 26 years old. I just finished up 2.5 years in the army. And I said to myself, that's it? This is all...
Yeah.
It's over? I was, I think like a lot of super ideological young foreigners that come to Israel to serve in the army, I was hungry for that action. It sounds so immature and so childish to say, but I think it's, there's no other way to say it. I was very much hungry to go to war. Every time there was almost a military operation in Israel, there was this sense, not just with me, but I think with a lot of the guys in the unit of like, yes, this is our time to finally do what we learned to do, and it just didn't happen. And, when we got out of the army, and this is 2019, and I remember saying to myself, I have to find a way to continue doing what I'm doing, where I'm feeling as if I'm doing something meaningful for the country, but obviously not in the army anymore because that period of my life is over. And from here to there, I ended up finding myself getting into the world of government consulting. Started working in EY's government and public sector consulting practice in 2019. Worked there. Have been working there now for almost 5 years. And that's been my own little way of feeling as if I'm reconnected to this great national Zionist project that brought me here as a teenager.
And you love it.
And I love it.
In case Michael's boss is listening, he
loves
it.
I absolutely love it. Having a great time. And yeah, so that was basically that in terms of, my time in, professionally and in the military.
Let's and then let's talk about this war now and how that. I mean, what I'll just kind of close the gap for me too. It's not, I don't think, very interesting to be honest, but I married that girlfriend that I told you about. We have a son now. He's awesome, and I just ended up going to the tech world in Israel. In Tel Aviv, there's a very large tech industry. First on the marketing side, then on the business side, which is what I'm currently doing. Also loving it, not going anywhere anytime soon, in case my boss is listening. to bring things up to the current era, because you've had a very interesting. I mean, we both have, but from very different sides of it, I would say.
Right.
In the war, you went into intelligence. I stayed with my unit in Yalom, but how's the war been for you?
Yeah, so I guess for me, I'll talk a little bit about the war. Just a little bit of background on a little bit part of the military side that I didn't get to mention is when I get released from the army, my main focus in my life is on the professional side of growing professionally at EY in the government and public sector practice. And at the same time, I started getting called back to reserve duty actually not in the armored corps, but in Israel's military intelligence, which had absolutely nothing to do with what I did in my regular service. But
That's good. They recognized that about you, that you'd be a much greater asset there.
Well, I don't know if it was them recognizing or if it was just like, we have a space to fill and you can fill space. So
don't take it down. I think the IDF knew what they were doing with this one.
One way or another, I ended up finding myself in a totally new side of the army of military intelligence. And I, at first I remember being very bummed out about leaving the tank corps, because for me, being in the armored corps was very much like, especially I'm sure if you speak with tanks, it's like once you're in that world of tanks and only tanks and tanks, it's very hard to think that there even is an army outside of that. It's the only thing you know about the army. But then you get exposed to this whole other world where you get trained at a very, very high frequency. I think I did my reserve duty in peacetime something like 5 times a year. I would go in to do regular training with Amman, with Israel's military intelligence, learn a brand new professional side of the army. And this is something that I kind of just did part-time alongside my job. And, in my head, before the war started, I never actually thought that I was going to use any of this stuff, because that's what I learned from my regular service. I learned a lot of random skills in my regular service in the Armored Corps. Never used any of them, or almost never used any of them, like very rarely. And I figured reserve service was kind of going to be a similar thing, where I was going to learn a brand new field. The Army's going to spend an enormous amount of money training me and giving me the skills of an intelligence officer. But, what are the chances? And October 7th, I find myself waking up in a hotel room in Holland with my fiance. I had proposed the week before. And October 7th was the day that we had our flight scheduled to come back to Israel.
Oof.
I have amazing timing, by the way.
Yeah, seriously.
And
hell of a way to end a post-engagement trip.
Exactly, yeah. And, obviously, I think like everyone, we woke up that morning to all of the terrible videos and the horrific updates that we were getting in real time. And our unit got called up. Like everybody's unit got called up, or almost everybody's unit got called up. And I found myself in a position where, by the time I made it back to Israel, it was kind of a logistical nightmare to find my way back and get a flight. Got back by October 9th and immediately went to base and found myself serving in my unit. I found myself really for the first time using stuff that I learned in training in real time. Really.
Can you give us a quick example on?
Yeah, I mean basically the Army. I'll try to speak as much as I can on this topic without, owing to the nature of things, going too much into detail. But the Army for years has been growing this subset of the intelligence world called field intelligence, which is basically this subset of the greater intelligence branch of the Army, where it integrates intelligence officers into different, typically combat units of the Army to ensure that intelligence reaches the field. This was a huge thing that Israel learned in the 2006 Second Lebanon War, where it didn't have intelligence reach the field, that it doesn't make any sense to have all the intelligence be done at the Kiryat, at the defense headquarters in Tel Aviv, where there's a lot of smart people in Tel Aviv who know what's going on, but if it doesn't reach the combat soldier in the battlefield, then you're kind of just not doing
intelligence for intelligence sake.
Exactly, you're collecting it for intellectual curiosity. You're not really making a difference on the battlefield. And Israel learned this lesson very, very significantly in the Second Lebanon War. And from 2006 until today, it has been investing an enormous amount of resources into growing this field intelligence side of the Army, where basically every single infantry, combat engineering, and tank unit in the Army has some intelligence officer that's attached to them from the level of battalion and up. So battalions, brigades, and up, you will have a team of intelligence soldiers that are working with an officer that's basically responsible for the intelligence of that unit. And for Israel, this was very much a revolution after years of really separating these two worlds of intelligence and the big army, so to speak, of really integrating them together. And I found myself integrated into the same organic unit that I served in my reserve duty with, into the 4th Brigade, which is an armored brigade that started out in Israel's north as a part of a defensive posture when Israel thought that in the beginning of the war that it may have to open up another front with Lebanon.
Right.
And later on in the war, ended up moving into battle and maneuvering in the Gaza Strip. First in the middle of the Gaza Strip, and then afterwards in the southern part of the Gaza Strip, in the Khan Yunis area. And I very much found myself navigating this complex situation where I'm no longer in the tank corps. I'm not exactly connected with the traditional intelligence role. I'm kind of stuck in between in this field intelligence role. And I kind of find myself the point person to speak with on a lot of issues that are relevant to our specific brigade's war effort. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, I think for me the war, obviously, if the war can be looked at from a lot of perspectives. There's the personal perspective, there's the humanitarian perspective, there's the political perspective, the economic perspective. There's so many ways you can look at it. But I think if we're already talking about field intelligence, I think for me the war was in addition to all of those things that I haven't yet gotten into, a truly fascinating professional experience of seeing how the army brings intelligence to the field in a very effective and efficient way, and seeing this well-oiled machine that we've always trained to work on in practice. And at the end of the day, like anything else in the army, the end goal of what we do is to make sure that the bomb that's dropped out of a plane or the soldier that's going into a house is focused on the right areas and it has the necessary intelligence that he needs to be as deadly as possible and as safe as possible. And that fundamental goal carried us through this entire war and was truly fascinating for me to see someone who was a part of this effort.
I can be honest with you, I think we already know what episode 2 is going to be about. I feel like there's a lot more to get into with this, and I definitely want to hear it.
Let's do it. We thought it was going to be about circumcision, but I guess we're off. We
will incorporate circumcision, obviously. Talking about the army, I think penises were half our discussion, and so we can get into that too. That'll be as a maybe a little appetizer at the beginning. So we'll do that, and then we'll get into your stuff as the main course. Dude, that's awesome. I mean, God, hearing you talk about October 7th too.
How did it touch you? How did it?
It's funny. Like, I initially had a flight to California to see my family because my dad and my sister still have not met my son. We had a flight on October 10th, and so October 7th I woke.
Also great timing.
Oh, amazing timing. And October 7th I woke up and it was a Saturday, and so I was planning on. I usually go for very long walks on the weekend. I was planning on taking the dog down to Yafo to this art shop that I had found, because I was going to buy some paintings for my sister and my mom. And, I was already up before the crack of dawn, thanks to my son. And my wife was up early too, because she was planning on she had an overnight shift scheduled at the hospital. And as I'm walking out the door, all of a sudden we hear sirens. And which is not an uncommon thing in Israel. So, like sometimes they happen. There's been times where it's happened once or twice, whatever, then the day goes on. But these were repeated, and, like everybody, we checked the news, and it was unbelievable. It's unbelievable what's happening. It almost seemed surreal or fake that this would be happening. My wife ended up going to her overnight shift, and I was just kind of home with the kid and the dog, and after spending the day sort of running between the shelter, and I went to the grocery store as well, and I knew what was going to happen. We all knew. the Army was going to call us up, and sure enough, we get a text in the group chat for my team, the same team I served with in my regular service, with our commanding officer being like, look, our team hasn't been called up yet, but because the unit doesn't want everyone showing up at once, because it's just going to overwhelm them logistically, but keep your phones on you throughout the day and keep them loud at night because it's going to happen. And that night, after I put my son to bed, finally, I just sat on my balcony, just chain smoking cigarettes and drinking beers, and just waiting for that text. And sure enough,
Wow.
5 a.m, there it is. Like, get to base. And my wife shows up, and you know, actually, I remember before she even came home, I remember just holding my son and just crying, like weeping. And then she showed up, and we went, my friends would give us a ride to base. And man, I'm tearing up right now just thinking about it. And as I'm giving them a hug goodbye, this kind of older guy comes up and he just goes, man, like, you know, this takes me back. Like, I remember having this exact same moment with my wife and son before I think he said the first Lebanon war. And it just,
Wow.
it was so depressing. So depressing to hear that, for me to be like, this is just nonstop. This is never gonna end.
Just an endless cycle.
It's an endless cycle, you know, like, and I, you know, because, you know, one thing, a lot of the guys in my unit, you know, their dads fought in Lebanon in the 80s and 90s, and they all told each other, you know, we're doing this so that our children won't have to. So our kids will only know peace.
Right.
Nobody talks like that today.
Right.
No one in Israel. Everyone in Israel says, you know, is we just need to make sure that our kids survive long enough to grow up to become soldiers.
Right, and then
because
replace
they will
us.
defend this culture,
Right.
this country. Yeah, their time will come too. And to me, and this again, I think as an American especially, I mean, first of all, it's just a human being just to think that, like, you know, what are you fighting for then? But as an American especially, I think there's a disconnect there. And that was actually the moment when I had this realization that I started thinking, like, this country's not for me. Like, I
Wow.
don't have that like, as much as I needed that identity at the time, for me, whatever, you know, if I want to do something stupid with my life, that's fine. But now that I'm older and I'm a father, this realization that, you know, national sacrifice isn't just you. You're sacrificing your children as well, potentially, you know, and for me, that's just, it's given me and my wife a lot to think about, basically. And, but anyway, I just, we're running a little bit low on time, but I'll give a brief summary, and then I think maybe next week we can go more into details. First 3 weeks was just on base training, non-stop training. We were part of the initial invasion of northern Gaza, which was by far the most intense part of my entire war experience. After those 2 weeks, they actually sent us up north, which was surreal because you're going from the chaos and explosions and the sand of Gaza to this. We were stationed on this beautiful kibbutz right in the middle of Galilee, and they would send us from there to various parts of the north where we essentially, I think, not so we can pretty much talk about this at this point. We were essentially planting trip mines and claymore mines along the border because the fence in the north is not complete, and all the construction workers obviously had to flee once Hezbollah started firing anti-tank rockets. So we would go in at night and plant these mines and claymores and tripwires. And we did that for about 6 weeks, and then we went back to Gaza, where we stayed on one of the bases that got attacked, actually. And from there, we were operating on that giant northern tunnel, like going into there on a regular basis, going to the various sort of sub-tunnels that branched out from there, mapping that out. Occasionally, they would send us into Khan Yunis on missions to blow up homes. If I'm being honest, they were just homes. And the entire thing eventually climaxed with us blowing up that gigantic northern tunnel with I don't even know how many tons of explosives. We ended up driving a vehicle into that tunnel in order to bring in the amount of explosives we needed to blow everything up. So a lot of time spent underground for those last 5-6 weeks, and then after that, we were the last team to get released, reserve team to get released. And since then, I've been back home, slowly kind of making my way back in civilian life. And that's where we are today.
Wow. Slowly making your way back to civilian life after experiencing all of that. Talk about a topic for another episode of this podcast.
That is very true too. But that's the part of every war is coming home. Everybody goes through it, and
that's for sure.
And I mean, if you're lucky, you go through it.
Yeah.
But yeah, for those who are, that's part of every war. It's coming home.
Absolutely.
It's got pretty heavy, which is kind of unavoidable. I think we're talking about Israel, especially today.
Yeah.
But I think that's about gonna wrap up the first episode of this yet to be named podcast. Hopefully by episode 2 we'll have an idea.
We promise that by episode 7 there will be at least half of a name. I can't promise a full name.
I think full name will come.
Half name I can definitely.
I can definitely. I'm not even gonna ETA it just because I'm Israeli now. Whatever I ETA is gonna take another year to come about into fruition anyway. So.
Exactly.
Thank you for listening if you made it this far, and see you next time.
See you next time, guys.